Hello and welcome to the E-Assessment Association's 2021 Conference and Awards. My name is Tim Burnett and I am Chair of the E-Assessment Association. Now, this is going to be a virtual event which is going to take place over each Tuesday within June. And each session we're going to start with an absolutely fantastic keynote speaker. We'll also be presenting 8 independently judged awards, very well deserved awards, and we'll be also hearing from 16 different insights from members of our community. So lots of content for you. I'd just like to take a moment to thank our headline sponsor, PSI Services, along with the awards and conference sponsors as well. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to thank the hardworking judges who've worked tirelessly to ensure that the awards are distributed fairly. Now, if you're watching this video, then you're watching via one of our social media channels or via our live stream page. Now, if you'd like to network, then you have time to change that. As I speak, delegates are settling down to chat ahead of the presentations in our online networking space called AirMeet. You still have time to change your mind. So if you want to meet new people, make new friends, then please go to e-assessment.com/conference/live and select the networking option. If you're going to stay with me, then I'm just going to take a moment just to introduce you to the 4 keynote speakers that we've got lined up this month. First of all, in speaking today, we have Dr. Mary Richardson from UCL. Now, EAA Secretary Graham Hudson caught up with Mary earlier this month to discuss her obsession with assessment and the projects she's been currently involved in.
I'm an associate professor based at UCL at the Institute of Education. I'm in the Department for Curriculum Pedagogy and Assessment. So my little research group forms the assessment bit of that. And we're a very small but perfectly formed group, and we run a master's in educational assessment too. So it's quite an unusual thing that we have going there, and it's got a nice history within the department here. And I suppose I've been in academia. I taught undergraduate for 10 years before the 6 years that I've been at UCL. But before that, I worked in assessment research for exam boards, and I did some work with DFE and QCA. So it goes back quite a way, about 20 years of being obsessed with assessment. It's always nice to be asked to be a keynote, but in particular, I think at the moment, e-assessment, people imagine it's something new, but obviously it has been around for a long time, but we are really beginning to show the importance of what we do now, the relevance of what we do and the value of it. So being able to bring something, I guess, to this conference as well from the academics view, from my particular positioning where I'm teaching people about this is, that's a real treat for me to be able to come along and bring my view and see what people think. As I've just started a project, I'm 6 months into that with Rose Clasham at Pearson, and we're looking at the test takers' responses and interactions with the PTE test of English. In particular, we're just interested at how you understand a test taker's experience of interacting with a computer and interacting with responsive AI technology that goes into their tests. Because there is actually very little about what it's like to be that person sitting in front of that computer. And so I'm attempting over the next couple of years to start cataloguing that and building up a picture for us all to understand what that's like.
Mary will be joining us shortly, so please get comfortable as it's going to be an absolutely excellent presentation. Next Tuesday, the 15th of June, Rory McCorkle from PSI Services will be delivering the keynote presentation as part of our celebration of the Champions of Change. Here's Rory to tell you more.
Hello, I'm Dr. Rory McCorkle, PSI Services Senior Vice President of Business Development and Client Success. And it's my extreme privilege to be able to join you all for the E-Assessment Awards celebrating the Champions of Change next Tuesday, June 15th. Very excited to join you all to talk about everything that the past year and almost year and a half of a pandemic has really initiated in terms of change in the e-assessment space. We've taken a workforce that was already suffering from a skills gap and watched that gap indeed widen. And a number of organizations around the world have responded to this change in varying ways through both education and assessment to better equip the workforce for this indeed very rapidly changing and evolving world. We've seen organizations create large-scale initiatives aimed at helping individuals to identify a new career space, get trained and ultimately certified so that they can enter that workforce and perhaps leave a career that does not exist in the time of the pandemic behind. I'm incredibly excited and look forward to the discussion and sharing this information with you, as well as hearing from you all on your observations during this time, the programs that you've seen that have been transformational and innovative, and indeed celebrating our award winners. Look forward to seeing you on the 15th of June, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Rory. This looks really exciting. On the 22nd of June, we welcome the 2019 Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Eric Shepard. Now, Eric specialises in talent transformation and use of technology, and here's just a short insight following a chat he had with Graham about what he's going to be talking about.
As many of your audience will know, I stepped down from looking after a multinational assessment company called Question Mark. And then the following day after stepping down, I thought, what do I want to do when I grew up? And realized that I really wanted to better understand mindset and skill set and how that would come together to help organizations perform. And that led me to build the talent transformation pyramid, which kind of helps people understand how things like personality and emotional intelligence and physical and cognitive abilities support their competence and competencies. So as this has evolved, I've realized with the fourth industrial revolution coming along that we have to understand ourselves better, understand others better. So I'm now involved with groups that are helping define competencies, which used to be really difficult, but now with machine learning and artificial intelligence and natural language processing is becoming easier. And I really feel that competencies underpin not only certifications and assessments, but also the education process and employment processes. And so I'm working on different initiatives to help kind of join up the different communities and using competencies as one of the languages for that.
We're really looking forward to that and hearing once again from Eric. Now, finally, Charles Fadell will be talking at our event on the 29th of June. Now, here's Charles chatting with Graham again about his background and why he's excited him in the world of assessment at the moment.
I studied electrical engineering and physics, but over my career, I transitioned from technology to education policy. And about a decade ago, when I left Cisco, I started this center to redefine the what of education, not just the how. In other words, the what has been lagging quite a bit because what's on the docket that we teach kids is still very, not very relevant at times. Furthermore, assessments matter enormously to me because unless we fix assessments, we're not going to fix the rest of the behavior. In essence, assessments are the scorecard. And in the corporate world, as in any human endeavor, the scorecard drives the behavior. So if we keep the same scorecards, we're not going to change education in any significant way.
Now, I hope that all sounds exciting. We look forward to you joining us over the next few weeks. Coming up shortly will be the CEO of the Assessment Association, Matt Wingfield, to open the first event. I look forward to seeing you myself personally on the 15th when I'll be chairing the event with Rory. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference and awards.
Hello and welcome to this, the first of our 4 e-assessment award ceremonies through the month of June. Today we'll be looking at The Future Is Now, looking at formative and summative assessment approaches, awarding prizes to the winners of those 2 categories within the e-assessment awards, but also hearing from Dr. Mary Richardson, as you've just been introduced to via the little intro video that Tim has just played, who's going to be talking about the use of AI in assessment today. And then later on, we're going to have a panel discussion with a range of experts from the area of assessment, chatting with me about formative and summative assessment and how that's been evolving and changing over these last few years. And of course, more recently, how the pandemic has impacted the delivery of both formative and summative assessment. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Matt Wingfield. I'm CEO of the e-Assessment Association. I also work as a freelance consultant within the e-assessment space. For those of you who aren't aware of the e-Assessment Association, who run and organize the awards and the conference as well, we are a professional membership body focused entirely on promoting and propagating better understanding of the use of technology to support the assessment process. We've got about 2,500 members now from all parts of the education sphere, from schools, colleges, universities, work-based learning, professional learning and enrichment, CPD, and also from all around the world. We have become, over the last few years, a truly international membership body. So if you're not already a member, please do think about joining. It's completely free to join as an individual member. Just go to e-assessment.com and there's a little sign up button on the page there where you can become a member and receive the latest news about what's happening in the sector. I should also mention that the association is very grateful for the support of all of our sponsors, our commercial sponsors. We've got about 23 of those now who fund the activity that we're able to deliver to our members. So that's a little bit about the association who underpin the delivery of these awards and the conference. Let's just quickly move on to talk about the program for today, so you can see what's coming up. And hopefully we'll have a little graphic in a minute on the screen. So today's, as mentioned, today's session is looking at the future of The Future Is Now. We're going to have very shortly a keynote presentation from Dr. Mary Richardson, who's Associate Professor for Educational Assessment at UCL within the Institute of Education. That will be followed by a little Q&A session with Mary, just to pick up on any questions that you've got for Mary following her presentation. We'll then move into the awards portion of the event. We'll first focus on the Best Formative Assessment Project Award, and we'll have the winner of that category announced. We're then going to take a short break. So for those of you who haven't used the AirMeet networking area as yet, there's an opportunity to do that after the Formative Assessment Project Award. When we come back from that, we'll focus on the Best Summative Assessment Project category and announce the winner from that. And then we'll move into a 30-minute panel discussion with a range of speakers who I'll introduce at the time, who will be happy to take questions from you around the topics of formative and summative assessment. And hopefully we'll find that a really engaging and useful discussion. And then we'll wrap things up at around 4:45 with a networking session to close the event off in the AirMeet platform that will run until about 5 o'clock. So that's the program for the day. If you do have questions for any of the panelists or for Mary after her or during her keynote presentation, please just use the chat facility in the platform that you're watching this presentation or this event on. We've got people capturing all of those questions, and then they'll feed those through to me so that I can put those to the panelists or to Mary. If you are using social media and you want to tell people about what's going on in the conference today, then please do remember to use the hashtag for the conference, which is hashtag EAAConf21. That's EAAConf21. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to our first keynote presentation from Dr. Mary Richardson. As I say, she's Associate Professor of Education within the assessment space at UCL and the Institute of Education. Mary's had quite a long and distinguished career, and as she described herself in the little intro video that we've just watched, as being obsessed with assessment for over 20 years. She's been at UCL for 6 of those 20 years, and before that spent 10 years at the University of Roehampton teaching undergraduate trainee teachers around the art of teaching and assessment. So lots and lots of experience to lean on in sharing some thoughts with us today around how technology-enabled assessment is playing out in today's world, and with a particular focus on artificial intelligence. So Mary, over to you. Thank you very much, and very much looking forward to hearing your keynote presentation.
It's great. Thank you so much, Matt, and thanks very much to the association for inviting me to speak this afternoon. So I've had my sort of formal introduction, but I would just like to obviously say that what I do at UCL is lead an MA in assessment, and that runs each year, and we have students come from all over the world, not just teachers, but other people who are interested in assessment, policymakers, etc. So you can find out more about that via the UCL website. Please feel free to contact me. I love to talk about assessment, you know, given my current obsession, and I also love to tweet about it too. So that's my Twitter name as well there. So when Graham and Matt contacted me and said, are you interested in doing a keynote? I said I would love to. And we were talking about this idea of the future and the fact that actually in terms of e-assessment, the future's already here. I think e-assessment's a fascinating area of assessment, and I'm really interested in all sorts of things to do with assessment. I will say from the get-go that today's session, I'm going to cover 2 things really. I'm going to cover this notion of e-assessment and some work that I've just started doing looking at artificial intelligence and how we respond in a human way to that. But I'm also partly a philosopher of education now as well, and I'm really interested in how people feel confident or not in assessment. And that has been obviously an amazing thing to be interested in over the past year and continues to be so. So there's a couple of things here that I'm going to look at, but I think they're also inextricably linked actually. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're an assessment technical person or an academic or a student or a parent. The most important thing is that we all keep discussing these issues and remembering that we all have a part to play in the healthy development of a really good assessment culture in schools, in colleges, universities. It doesn't matter where assessment goes on. It matters that we do it well. And in particular, that we use new and emerging technologies in ways that are so that can be so beneficial and so useful to both teachers and learners. I've got Tim in the background doing my slides. So if we could go to slide 2, please, Tim, that would be lovely. Thank you. So one of the things, being a philosopher as well, that I'm interested in is looking at the logical or not nature of arguments. And something that I think is very interesting in terms of assessment, and I noticed that one of the other speakers mentioned that in his film. He talked about thinking about the what. And I think that's so important, because what surrounds a lot of assessment, particularly in public discourses, are what I call kind of mythologies. And I'm never quite sure where these have come from, but they build up. And I'm sure all of you recognize some of these. You hear people saying technologies are going to personalize and revolutionize education. But then also, conversely, you hear the naysayers saying, well, you know, e-assessment's far too new for us to trust. And of course, you know, we know different. Or AI technology means I'm relinquishing all control over my data. And also this notion that something that is technologically different, because the pace of change can be so fast in terms of technological developments, and things can subsume each other really quickly, people often might dismiss things as faddish or unreliable, and they're cautious about them. And these things, if we come back to each of them, I think are really important to think about. So the first one, in terms of yes, we might be able to personalise and revolutionise education using technology. And we certainly can, in many respects, reach out to a lot more people, particularly with assessment. And particularly, for example, with the work that I've started to do recently with Pearson, looking at their PT Academic, which is an international test of English. Indeed, it will, once it can be opened up to an even broader market than they're already in, it will be the kind of thing that could revolutionise how people take language tests for access to higher education, to further education, even for citizenship going forward. And not just having to go to a test centre and take a test, that they could take it on their phone. They could access it at a localised centre. And those kind of things are really helpful. Then we come to the myths around the fact that things are new and untrustworthy. And of course, we all know in the business of e-assessment, it's not actually very new. Some of you may remember some 20 years ago an internet-based test called World Class Tests. I actually helped do some of the very first research on that project with children, where I did observations and what we call Think Aloud protocol work, observing children test taking on screen. That's 20 years ago. And what I suppose surprises me more than anything at the moment is actually how slow in England the education system has been to, encourage and welcome changes into the system. And I think we've been, in many respects, very, very cautious, or even far too cautious in that regard. But I also think that links to this idea of suspicion, which is the third point, about people talking about a loss of control and a fear that somehow the mutant algorithm, as Prime Minister Johnson called it last year, trying to give some kind of humanistic, entity to what was basically a mathematical model, that whilst none of us would disagree that it was an unfair modelling of the data, it was a model. It had no AI technology in it. The fact that people are afraid to share data in this way and are afraid that AI assessment might look at them in a different way or impact them adversely is also very odd. When friends say to me, "Oh, I'm not sure about that, I don't like the idea of being observed," I always say, "Well, you've got one of these, haven't you? And you've got, like, if you're like me and you like running, you've got one of these, haven't you? Well, hang on, these things all collect lots of data about me. So why are you worried about, your data being collected for one thing and not another?" It's an interesting kind of logical or illogical argument anyway. And then this idea of faddishness too, thinking about what we do and don't want from our education system too, and from our assessment systems too, I think is also really important. Because I think there are also there's a lot of old-fashioned talk, as I call it, going on out there of people who are, will be gripping to grim death their pencil and paper and saying, "You must sit an exam in a hot exam hall. This is how it's always been." Well, actually, it doesn't have to be like that. We know that from a teaching and learning perspective, that's not the best way to assess pupils for everything. It's a good way for some things, but not for everything. And I think this is all part of busting these myths and working forward to think about what we trust, what could be more true about education and particularly assessment. And in doing that, the more we explore these things, the more we talk about them, the more we can improve public confidence in them. So the things go hand in hand. So if we come on to the next slide, please. Because I really like this quotation. I don't know if you've heard of Anthony Seldon. If you haven't, can look him up. He's quite an extraordinary, I would say, polymath. He used to be the director of Wellington College. He's now Pro-Vice Chancellor of Buckinghamshire Private University in England. He's absolutely prolific. I'm not sure he ever sleeps because he's written so many books. But a book he wrote on new technology in education is very interesting. And I think, I think my criticism of that is the fact that he talks about technology becoming cheaper. It will become available to everybody. It will enable an individual approach to education for all children. And ultimately, constantly analysing pupil performance in this way, using technology in this way, will make exams redundant. I think that's a bit too big a leap in terms of what our expectations are as teachers and also for learners. The one thing that COVID has shown us, and this is replicated internationally, is that there is a deeply unfair distribution of technological resources worldwide. And even in this country, we still see it, the haves, the have-nots, in terms of who has access to enough technology to support them, who has enough access to good quality internet sustained connections. And we saw this all through last year. Students trying to revise at home using a single mobile phone to try and do all of their schoolwork in a home where maybe mum or dad was also reliant on that one piece of technology to try and do some work. That is disadvantage at its absolute worst. And in terms of an example, it's the best kind of example. And until we can really think about how we level the playing field and how we enable people to have, equitable, truly equitable access to the right kinds of technologies, I think we need to tread carefully about saying what we are offering to everybody. So the next slide, please. Thank you. Because I say this to be cautious, because our assessment has to do a lot and it has to put up with a lot. Obviously I am an academic, but I come from a policy making background too, and that, and teaching and working in schools background. So as far as I'm concerned, assessment isn't something that happens at the end of learning. It's not something that's just attached onto it. It's part of everything we all do. Whenever we're learning things, we're also constantly assessing ourselves, not necessarily in a formal sense, but it's going on. And what feeds into that, and what you need for a good recipe for achieving well and for understanding and developing learning, are those factors of motivation, equal access, good resources, and good levels of engagement. And that's what, those are the things that really help a learner progress. And so if we have the next slide, please. So I have raised a few questions here because I think there are things that could come out in the panel discussion, but also things that I think are really important when we talk about using technologies in assessment. One of the things that people often say to me is, apart from I'm afraid of my data being misused, they also say, well, hang on, aren't these things really easy to cheat on? So one thing I often do is turn the argument around and say, why do you always start from a position of mistrust? I'm not being naive. I know that students try to cheat. And boy, I've seen some amazing examples in recent years of students doing all sorts of quite extraordinary things to assignments before they upload them. And it is getting quite sophisticated, but the majority of people don't do that. And I think we need to talk a bit more about the way that we want to assess what we want from students to try and actually head off this notion of cheating, because the more we talk about cheating and the more we mistrust people and the more we kind of hold them to account, it is actually in many cases a foregone conclusion. People will try to beat the system, or if they feel under great pressure and stress, which is what often happens in schools, you will find instances of cheating because people feel so pressured. The other thing is thinking about the competitive nature of assessments. What are they for? What do we want them for? Are they about learning, or are they just about some form of competition? I do hear some people say, well, we have to say it's not a competition. Well, actually it is. That's what happens in schools. I'm not saying that's right, but I think we have to remember our part in this is that we are enabling part of the competitive kind of ethos that runs through education. And we have to remember, what our part is in that. And can we be part of making a change? Is that what learners need, or is that what they want? Do they want those grades only, or is it that they actually need something else when we're assessing them? Do they need something more? And coming up are going to be awards for things like formative assessment. And that's about improving learners' understanding, improving how you learn and how you think about the world. So again, as e-assessment people, I think we need to think about this quite carefully. And on to the next slide. I don't claim this is the silver bullet, but it's one of my proposals. I'm just finishing a book on the issues of confidence in assessment. And one of the key things I think is about literacy. If you help teachers to be more literate about assessment, they'll be much more confident. If you help candidates feel literate, they will also feel confident. And if they know and understand what they're doing, that will help them. They obviously have to do some revision too, to be fair. It's not just enough to know. They've actually got to put the hours in. But the other big area, I think, is literate parents, teachers, and the public. In the last year, I've never seen so many instances where I've thought on social media, in the news, I've heard them on radio interviews, I've done all sorts of things from people where I've just thought there is no basic knowledge of how assessment systems work. And I think that our students and our teachers deserve a lot better. And I think that in terms of how we use technology and how we encourage people to do that, again, is about improving literacy. If we can come to the last slide, just to finish. In doing that, if we enable literacy, we free people to be more confident to experiment with things, to think about them, and to challenge those ideas. And this paper, you can download this paper, it's free, it's open access. Hooray to everybody. It's with myself and Rose Clesham, and we've looked at the kind of things that people are fearful of in educational settings in relation to change and in relation to the use of new technologies, particularly artificial intelligence. As Matt said at the beginning, if you would like to get in touch, please do. Feel free to email me. I'm always happy to talk assessment 24/7. And I would like to say thank you very much to the Assessment Association. It's an honour to have been asked to speak today. Thank you.
Mary, that was great. Thank you very much for sharing that insight and your thoughts on all of that with us. And I think it's interesting when you think about some of the things that you touched on there around cheating, around managing expectations. So you made a point about what learners need rather than what learners want. I think that's interesting too. And managing that whole expectation process all the way across the stakeholder base. Because I think if you think back to what happened here in the UK, at least last year when we were battling with the pandemic, a lot of the mistrust that arose in the approaches that the government decided to take in the end were partly because people didn't understand what they were trying to achieve with those approaches. And I wonder whether or not there's we're talking about increasing confidence in the use of technology within assessment, but I also wonder whether there's part of it about people understanding the role that technology can take, because I think often people rush to make assumptions that says this technology is going to replace me, it's going to get rid of my job as an assessor or as a teacher. But actually, if they understood the process and took time to understand the literacy a bit, maybe they wouldn't feel that way. And I wondered whether you had thoughts around how we tackle that as a sector in terms of trying to overcome those fears around people's understanding of what technology is trying to do.
Yeah, I think this is a really big thing, actually, Matt. I think you're absolutely right. I think often schools, and if I start an example from my own area, I did some work a few years ago in UCL, just interviewing tutors about bringing in e-marking systems and also some more electronic assessments. And one of the first things I came up against were lots and lots of tutors going, well, they can just make me redundant then, can't they? And I was like, well, no, because you have the expert knowledge in chemistry or history or whatever it might be. We can't replicate that. What this is going to do actually in certain assessments is take some of the real donkey work and really boring work, because quite frankly marking is very dull, take some of that away from you so that you can spend more time on the types of assessment that are actually enriching somebody's learning even more. and then combining that assessment outcome from the test that's used the technology, etc., and then the other enriched assessment, that you've done perhaps formatively in a classroom or whatever, to create something that's actually an even better learning experience. But I think it's going to take quite a long time, and I think one of the issues is that we have in this country we have lots of different sets of teaching people how to educate people and how to assess people, and it's really hard to make sure that you can get all of that information to everybody. And I think that's potentially one of our biggest challenges going forwards, as to how you educate the educators about this.
Yeah, and actually, we've had a couple of comments in the chat area. Chris Ryan, who's Pro Vice Chancellor at Monash University in Australia, agreeing with what you're talking about there, and asking very similar question about how we get academics to start to embrace a change in assessment process and overcome some of those repetitive approaches. I think that's key. I think it's interesting that we often distinguish, and I noticed you were trying to bring them together in your presentation. We often distinguish educational learning from assessment. And I often wonder whether that's part of the problem too, that people don't see them as joined up. They see them as very separate things, and that teaching is something that you take part in, or learning, is something you take part in, and assessment is something that's done to you.
Yeah.
And that often disengages people. And again, the whole literacy piece might feed into that, mightn't it?
It is. I think the language of this is absolutely vital. It's one thing we're very strict on at UCL, actually. We don't use the term teacher training. We use the term teacher education in our department. So none of the people who come to us to learn how to be teachers are trained. They're educated, and we're all quite fussy about that. And it sounds odd, but actually it makes people think differently about it. And we also we say to them in their education, you are never delivering lessons, you are never delivering assessments. That's what people do with your groceries or whatever. That's what delivery is. You are educating people, you're presenting things, you're challenging people. And actually that's a big part, how we change our language. And I think a lot of that is used, that language of delivery, of kind of consumption is now being used more broadly. And in a way, we as educators, and in assessment in particular, we have to claim back some of our language and say, well, hang on a minute, it's not all one thing. When we assess, we're not necessarily talking about someone taking an exam. We might be talking about a piece of really rich formative assessment, or we might be talking about a test, or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's people understanding the different forms that assessment can take as much as anything else, isn't it? And it's interesting also, there's another comment here from John Norris from the Chartered Insurers Institute, talking about how assessment literacy is key, and we need to be transparent with learners about why their assessments are being checked for plagiarism and cheating, which I think is it is about, as John says there, it's not about trying to catch them out, it's about educating them so that they can understand why it's important in the context of that. And I wonder whether that, just one final question for you, I wonder whether you have any thoughts or advice on how we take the propagation of this assessment literacy to other contexts, like professional learning, from the where John was talking about, from the CII, from schools-based assessment. So assessment at scale. How do we get people to embrace and understand the assessment process and the literacy of that process when you're talking about things at scale rather than just within one institution or whatever? Do you have any thoughts or advice for people on that?
I do. I mean, I think if I had a magic wand, what I would like to do is to be able to create a kind of an actual national campaign of education, about education. Just as you have national campaigns on health, I think that these things are so high stakes, they impact our lives so much. We cannot take away from the fact that exams, the high stakes exams we take in our lives, have a big impact on our lives and have a big impact on driving us.
And I feel that they are deserving. I feel our education systems and what comes out of them are deserving of that kind of marketing. But the place we can start this is in teacher education courses. We need to spend more time and money in helping educate teachers about assessment and how to do more of it. And then kind of that can help with some of the trickle down. But if I had an unlimited budget, I would do it big scale and I would make it a big campaign.
Yes, yeah. And we could carry on talking about this for a long time, so but unfortunately we don't have the time. We must move on, but thank you very much again for sharing your thoughts with us. There were some other questions which you've not had time to come to, but we might be able to pick up some of those in the panel discussion later on, which I know you're joining us for again. So thank you again, Mary, and we'll now move on to the first of the award categories. So, as I mentioned, we're moving on to the first of the award categories, looking at the initially at the best formative assessment project category, an area that's very close to my heart. As I gave a hint there, I think part of the problem sometimes is we distinguish learning and assessment too much, and formative assessment is a really good example of how if things are working properly and learning and assessment are working in harmony, you can deliver great results. We're very grateful to ACER UK for sponsoring the Best Formative Assessment Project Award this year. Without their sponsorship and support and the support of the other sponsors of the awards, we wouldn't be able to put on the ceremony. And at this point, I'd like to introduce to you, all of you, to Dr. Desmond Birmingham, who's the CEO of ACER, who's very kindly agreed to introduce us to the finalists and the winner, announce the winner of the award for the formative project category. Desmond, over to you.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to the E-Assessment Association for organising this event. It's a shame we can't all be together, and I'm sure we're all going to be missing the dinner later on this evening, but it is wonderful that you've been able to bring together people from all over the world for this event and for the events in the coming weeks. ACER, for those that are not familiar with us, is one of the largest of the world's education research organisations. We have over 400 researchers and experts working particularly on assessment as well as other forms of evaluation around the world. ACER was proud to be part of the original research to design and develop the PISA assessments, and we know the impact that's had around the world, and we continue to talk to and work with the OECD on future developments of that. We, like many people on this call, I'm sure, have had a difficult year, and I think it has been very interesting, as Mary has said, the challenges and the way the education system has responded to the challenges of the pandemic. We have ourselves as a company been proud to win an Investors in People Silver Award during this pandemic period, and we took that as a reflection of how important it is for us to continue to invest in professional development of our staff, even in these difficult times. And in Australia, our colleagues there won the award of one of the best places to work in Australia from the Financial Review program BOSS. The key that we feel about assessments, and that we've demonstrated, I think, in our main work in the UK, is that it does contribute to learning. And we've been proud over the past nearly 5 years now to have worked with the Scottish Government to develop and deliver the Scottish National Standardised Assessments. And this, as many people will know, is a fully digitised assessment. It is designed explicitly to help the teacher identify the strengths and weaknesses of the children in the classroom, and it is therefore helping them to improve their learning. Our colleagues in Scotland are very clear and very glad that it is not like the SATs in England, and therefore is not a part of an accountability system, is not there to undermine, it's there to support teacher professional judgment, and it cannot be used to help people create school league tables. So for me, I think we have a very good model very nearby in Scotland of how good formative assessment delivered digitally can actually help improve learning in the classroom. We've built on that as a company by piloting and launching recently the Scottish Online Formative Assessments, or SOFA as we call it for short, which is there to help schools use in the years in between the national assessments. We've had very positive response to that, and in particular we've had positive response both to the national assessments and to the formative, the SOFA assessment after the pandemic and after schools have reopened.
And what's encouraging is that teachers are clearly seeing these assessments as valuable tools to identify where the children are when they come back after this long period of being away from school. Turning now to the awards, and it's been a pleasure and we're proud to have been able to sponsor the Formative Assessment Project Award this year. Perhaps no surprise, there's been a higher number of entries than ever, and that there have been numerous companies that have been innovating and rising to the challenge in different ways that have been posed by the pandemic. The 4 finalists, I want to give credit to all 4 of them, and the panelists wanted me to just summarize the strengths as they saw them. The first finalist was Prodigy, who developed the world's first assessments through Minecraft in their Coding in Minecraft computer science curriculum program, developing formative skills and using assessment and credentialing programs using the Minecraft tool. The program engages young people and diverse learners from middle grades in the US Key Stage and in the equivalent to Key Stage 2 and 4 in the UK. It uses game-based learning in a very exciting way that actually engages the young people, helps them learn, and actually creates the assessment without them even knowing they're being assessed. That was one of the comments that was made in the presentation. The second finalist was Measurement Incorporated, and with their product MI Write, which is a web-based automated writing evaluation system that helps facilitate the teaching and learning of writing by providing students with automated scores and feedback on the key aspects of writing: development of ideas, organization, style, word choice, sentence fluency, and the conventions of writing across all the different multiple writing genres. MI Write promotes the writing improvement while engaging the students' interest and enables students to submit responses, get immediate and meaningful diagnostic feedback and scores, explore instructional tutorials, and utilize peer review. The third finalist was Examplay Edutech, a technical platform that gives intelligence to teachers on the stage of learning that a student is finding difficult to master, whether it's comprehension, knowledge, application, analysis, synthesis, creation, or evaluation. And with this intelligence, the teacher can then immediately help the student with targeted and correct intervention and help the student master the subject matter more easily and faster. And then the last finalist was Read Labs, and Reads IE was able to predict with 98% accuracy within less than 10 questions the score a learner would achieve normally in the 2.5-hour test, using the test of English for International Communications as an example. Based on this feedback from the app, the student could then select their study options and develop their own formative learning plan, looking at their strengths and addressing their weaknesses. The panelists felt that all 4 finalists really demonstrated great innovation and creativity and really wanted to give credit to all 4 of them. However, there could only be one winner, and the winner this year of the eAssessment's Best Formative Assessment Project goes to Prodigy. The panel felt that Prodigy excelled in all areas of their submission, and they were excited about the robustness of the project they presented. The innovative use of technology to assess pupils formatively across the country and across the world was impressive, and they felt they were really passionate as a company about what they were doing. They particularly liked the equality of access and their support for their users, and they answered all the questions around accessibility really well. It was clear that standards they were using were adaptive across all the different contexts. Many congratulations to Prodigy. Thank you very much, Desmond, for that, and many congratulations to Prodigy Learning for their lovely win there in the Formative Assessment Project Award. And thank you very much, Desmond, for all the support that ACR give both the association and, in this particular case, for the support for the Best Formative Assessment Project. So thank you very much. So we're now going to give you an opportunity to have a bit of a break in between the 2 award category presentations. We're going to break for 10 minutes. So if you could aim to be back at 4 o'clock precisely. If you're in the AirMeet platform where the networking is taking place, the platform will bring you automatically back to the show. But if you are going to step away from us for a minute to have a break, please do make sure you're back at at 4 o'clock so that we can start promptly with the Summative Award presentation. So we look forward to seeing you then. For those of you who just want to sit and relax at your desks for a minute, we're going to play a short video now that's going to look back at the highlights of the Formative Assessment Award from last year. I've got a couple of questions which I thought might put to each of you, or each of the groups of you. So I think this is starting to diminish. I think more and more it is, but you're still seeing pockets of resistance from teachers who see technology as a threat. I think particularly as soon as you mention the word AI or artificial intelligence, people get resistance to it. And I just wondered what each of you might say to those teachers to try and reassure them that actually the technology is there to help them. Dan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm totally resonates. Look into the eyes of a teacher, and there's loads here, including you, Matt, of course. And have to look into the eyes of a teacher and say artificial intelligence without giving them context. Why would they not be afraid? And it's scary without context, without experience. I think it's all about making sure whatever technology you put in front of the teacher, they see it as enabling. If they don't, you're not doing your job, or your technology doesn't do it. And the reality is, it's not the teacher that needs to change their opinion as much as the way the EdTech providers need to present it. You know, it's going to be tough, and this is over the ages. Whichever technology, you can go back 500 years. It's the same issue with lots of technology adoption. You know, you will get the best technology adoption when the teachers talk to other teachers. Teachers will listen to other teachers, and those role models in the industry, those teaching professionals which are looked upon as the kind of those who are breaking barriers, those are the ones which actually will make the difference. So in our experience, you talk to the largest multi-academy trusts, those institutions that have the great academic leaders, they will get there. But be aware, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes EdTech is not the right solution, and people just as well need to accept sometimes that's not the right way to go anyway.
Yeah, no, agreed. Thank you, Dan. Andy, Fiona, thoughts on you from the Welsh schools in particular and their reception to the technology approach to assessment?
Yeah, I would strongly echo what Dan has just said. I think there's a really strong element of hearts and minds going into any adoption of EdTech. We had a pretty tough job. I remember at the start of the Welsh project going down to Cardiff for project inception, and teachers being involved and just shaking their heads and saying, this ain't going to work. You're not going to be able to persuade people to do this. So while I focused in the presentation earlier on a lot of the technical and logistical elements, there's a massive existential element to it. Mm-hmm. And I completely empathize as a former teacher with people who have got an awful lot going on in their jobs and see it as an imposition. That's why we were very keen for it not to be a fait accompli. We're very keen to take people with us and say, look, this is going to make things better. This is going to make your lives and jobs easier. And so I think there's a huge element there on how you present whatever it is you're doing, even if in reality you are imposing it. It's the presentation.
It is the presentation, yeah, no, indeed. Fiona, anything to add to that?
I think one thing that was really important was the fact that all this was automatic. So the previous paper assessments were teacher marked. Obviously, that did take up a lot of time, and the new assessments are all done automatically. So I think it's really important that the technology is there not to sort of muscle in, but to support the teaching and the pedagogy, which was important for us because, you know, these are formative assessments. They're about pointing out to the learners and to the teachers what they need to be working on, and the assessments are just there to help the teachers do their job better and to make it easier for them. It's not about, you know, replacing anything. So
no, thank you for that. And after, I guess if you go for a teaching job at Bolton College, you know what you're getting yourself into. But there must be some teachers who are still sceptical about it, and perhaps in surrounding colleges where they're not so pro. What would you say to them?
My biggest piece of advice would be don't try to sell the technology. Start with the problem. All the teachers and the support teams around the campus have day-to-day problems that they have struggle addressing. So we'll say, can we help you address that particular problem? So for instance, the exams office and the teachers said that during exam season, students always have troubles remembering where they need to go, when the exam is, and so on and so forth. And the ADA service now at the college takes that pain away from the exams office and the teachers, because it delivers the timely information to all the students via SMS, nudges on the homepage, and if students are asking the computer when their exams are, then it gives them the answer that they need. So the exams officer said, you've suddenly taken away half our workload and pain and pressure and problems during the exam season. And the teachers have also said that all the Q&As, all the questions that they had, saying, where's my exam, where do I need to go to? Teachers have a quieter time before the exam period as well now, because the students are kept up to date. So when we always ask the teachers, what is your problems that you have? And can we use technology to assist you and to reduce the level of pressure that you have as a teacher on a day-by-day basis? And then once you can demonstrate that it takes away these pressures, makes your life as a teacher easier, and it also improves the outcomes for your students, and they get a better time and experience at the college, then we win friends over. And you see conversations around the campus where teachers will say, oh, you should use First Pass or you should use Ada, so that they sell it on our behalf. So that's the way I see it. Look at the problem, ask teachers what the problems are and address those, and then you win hearts and minds over.
Brilliant. No, thank you. I think you're all resonating around that. Sell the problem, sell the solution that the technology can bring to support the teacher. And it does often strike me that artificial intelligence in its own right as a phrase is quite combative from a teacher's perspective. And I always talk about AI being augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, because it's there to support rather than.
And we don't use the word AI at the college at all.
No.
We use computer-mediated technology. That's our phrase. So it mediates between you as a student and teacher as well. So how can computers help you out? So we stay away from AI altogether because it does scare, and also AI means different things to different people. Whereas if you say, how's a computer going to address this problem, and you can show it to me, that's fine. They can understand that language.
Brilliant, thank you. So a question's come in from the audience. So this was specifically directed towards Alpha Plus, but actually I think it's something that many of you might have some thoughts on. So as long as you don't mind, Andy Fiona, I'll open this up a little bit. So it says, successful rural delivery used to be the last mile of e-assessment delivery. With the tech proven, what remaining objections does the e-assessment sector need to tackle, answer, and promote? So where's the problem shifted to, I guess, from the last mile delivery piece to other things? Thoughts on that? Andy, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I don't think that the problem has been entirely overcome yet, and there is still a disparity in terms of broadband connectivity and IT infrastructure. There's an urban-rural split for some reason. And that's probably across the board everywhere. I think in Wales, I know the Welsh Government have put in an awful lot of infrastructure development to try to prevent that from being an issue. But I still think it's in play to some extent, and it's a gradual thing. It may be the last mile, but it's a journey that we're still on. And if you're going to truly get parity across the board, you need that infrastructure to be equally for everybody.
Okay, thank you for that. Fiona, any further thoughts on that?
I would say that going back to what we were saying before, the last hurdle is getting people on board, getting buy-in from teachers and learners and parents. And once you have the support from the community of what, how technology can help them and how we can solve their problems, and once you have the buy-in from the teachers, it'll make it a lot easier.
Indeed, indeed. Dan, anything to add in your experience?
I think it's around, for us, it's always been around the device issue as well, just as well as the connectivity issue. Rural and also certain coastal towns have such a high proportion of pupil premium that assuming that they have devices at home is a mistake all the time. Assuming that there's devices one-on-one for students. And COVID was a great example where there may be a device at home, but if there's 4 children at home or 3 children at home, they all can't have the device all the time. So I think there was that challenge. A lot of EdTech now is getting used to low bandwidth, but I think it's getting better, but it's not solved yet.
Okay, thank you for that. And Aftab, any last thoughts on this one?
No, back on the sentiments there. My bit around last mile is also around reimagining things. So at the moment, when you speak to education leaders, teachers, mums and dads and students, they're very conversant in traditional legacy services, and they need to start seeing the world in a very fundamentally different way, how to do things. The technology platforms, the way you can combine them and put them together, gives you new products and services that weren't envisioned before. So it's part of the last mile really is to say, well, how do we break out of this box where over the last 20 odd years we've been used to certain technologies and certain platforms, and how can we actually reimagine the world so that it behaves in a very different way? so that, yes, the rural mums and dads and children can also get those services as well. So I think we need to start seeing services in a fundamentally different way from what we're used to right now. But that's going to be quite painful because we're so used to, we've got a lot of traction right now in terms of using this platform, that platform, and you're thinking, guys, there's another world out there that you're not seeing.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed either watching that short video about last year's formative assessment category finalists or networking in the AirMeet platform. For those of you who were watching the video, I was slightly shocked to see that my decor behind me was more or less the same, although those perceptive amongst you will have noticed that the pictures have changed and that the houseplant has done less well in the last 12 months, which is slightly embarrassing. And I'll be taken to task on that by my wife, I suspect. So, but without further ado, I'd like to move on to our next category. This is for the Best Summative Assessment Project Award, which is very kindly sponsored this year by TCS ION, one of the association's main sponsors. And I'm delighted to introduce you to Viral Shah from TCS ION, Head of Products, Engineering and International Business. Viral, over to you to take us through the finalists and announce the winner of the Best Summative Assessment Project.
Thanks, Matt. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Viral Shah. I'm joining from Mumbai, India. I'm from TCS Tata Consultancy Services. As part of TCS, I had products, engineering and international business for TCS ION. TCS ION is an education-focused business unit as part of TCS. And we are a large products and platform organization specialized into assessment, marking, learning, and business process management. We have vast experience in conducting nearly 250 million candidate assessments worldwide. And hence, as an organization, we have always encouraged new innovation in the space of technology and assessment. We have seen several academic institutions struggling significantly last year for the summative assessments. Still, many of them have reached the summative stage, but they are not able to conduct the examination. There are many challenges related to infrastructure, awareness, use of technology, confusion on whether they should go ahead, they should not go ahead with e-assessment. We have helped large number of institutions last year and this year in crossing this stage by educating them, working with their teachers, administrative staff, providing them state-of-art technology in unique managed service model and conducting their summative assessment. So with this brief introduction of TCS ION and myself, I would like to introduce the most awaited award category, summative assessment. We as TCS ION is glad to sponsor the summative assessment award category this year. And being an assessment technology provider, this subject has been very close to our heart. And we are very excited that to see that the innovations in the field of technology and process, which will make assessments which will take the assessments to the next level. This award category this year have received an impressive number of participation this year, with entries pouring from India, South Korea, South Africa, Australia, and UK. And our judges really had a tough time in selecting the best amongst the entries. 3 projects from the very diverse fields were selected as this year's finalists. You can see it on the slide. Explore Analytics, Monash University, and University of Pretoria. All 3 projects were extremely impressive, while 2 of them demonstrated the complexity of modern-day assessment projects. After a little more probing, judges felt that they had the potential to be very strong contenders in other categories. And our winner today established themselves as a strong example of summative assessment, and our judges were unanimous in their decision for the winner. Let us first watch a short video before the winner is announced. This video has been recorded by the chair of panel judging the best summative assessment project this year, 2021, Patrick Courts, consultant and director of International Skills UK. May I please request video to be played, please?
Good morning. I'm Patrick Coates, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be able to be involved in the Assessment Awards again this year. I'm the lead judge for the best use of summative assessment, and I've been working with my fellow judges, Emma Beattie, Martin McCain-Bremner, and Peter Alston. I've always enjoyed being involved in the EA Awards. It provides an opportunity to see a range of solutions from both large and small organisations, and to see what is happening in both the UK and abroad. Whilst I've been involved in global assessment for the last 30 years, it's all too easy to become very UK-centric. So this year has been no exception with regards to global coverage. We have Lexplore, the UK division of a Swedish company, the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and Monash University in Australia. So the three submissions we have, and this is not in any particular order. So Lexplore is a tool that uses eye tracking technology combined with AI and machine learning to deliver rapid assessments in both primary and secondary schools to deliver objective results on a child's literacy. By measuring when, where and how a student's eye move in relation to the words they are reading, quickly analyses their skills across key reading components, determining their attainment, and highlights potential barriers to literacy in a matter of minutes, and also helping to identify reading difficulties and optical challenges that might often be missed. The University of Pretoria, whilst work has been going on in online assessments for a while in South Africa, usage has increased with the impact of COVID on the education system. The integrity of online assessments has, however, presented a challenge for lecturers and universities without scalable remote proctoring solutions. The result of this has been that online assessments are usually not invigilated, which provides opportunities for collusion and unauthorised communication amongst students via applications such as WhatsApp. So by using a university-developed messaging tool, rather than stopping working collaboration, it has actually been encouraged with the instant messaging embedded in the assessment processes and students encouraged towards problem solving in an assessment setting and replicating more realistic work environment. So their interaction is marked as well as their responses. Monash University. Over the last 3 years, Monash University has been developing their internal system for online invigilated electronic-based assessments. Whilst Monash did look at commercial platforms, they wanted to have something they had control of, and basically they created an organisation within the university which covered all departments. They are now in a position where all exams have been replaced by online invigilation, so no more paper and pencil at all. Whilst naturally not intentional, this has allowed Monash to maintain operations during the pandemic with entirely an off-campus delivery in both Australia and overseas locations, with students using their own devices. And then AI tools directly supporting invigilation, ensuring exam conditions are maintained. So I look forward to joining you all at the awards, where we will find out from Lexplore, the University of Pretoria and Monash University, which are the winners of the Best Summative Assessment Award. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Perfect. So the moment is here now to announce the winner of the Best Summative Assessment Project 2021. And the winner is Monash University for their project E-Assessment Delivering Authentic Assessment at Scale. Congratulations, Monash University and the entire team behind it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Viral. Thank you very much, TCS ION, for supporting the awards and the continued support you give the association. And many congratulations to Monash University for their win in this category. That's wonderful news, which I'm sure will be resonating loudly in Australia at the moment. Thanks again, Viral.
Thank you.
So there you go, our 2 award winners announced for formative and for summative assessment. But please don't leave us at this point. We've got more really interesting conversation and debate for you. Coming up right now is a panel discussion session where we're going to be looking at exploring this whole topic of the future is now around formative and summative assessments. We've got a great lineup of panelists to speak to you. We've got Dr. Mary Richardson joining us again, having delivered her keynote earlier on. Jeremy Carter was one of the judges in the formative category and is a consultant and founder of Edutech, Advanced Edutech. We've got Pat Coates, who you just saw in that short video, also as a judge of the Summative Award category, an independent consultant as well, and director of International Skills UK, and also a member of the EAA board. Helen Claydon, who's head of test development and a senior research fellow at ACER UK, joins us representing the sponsors of the best formative assessment category. And finally, but by no means least, Viral Shah, who you've just heard from, head of products engineering and international business at TCS Ion, the sponsors of the best summative assessment project. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you for staying with us, Mary, for this part of the session. Viral, thank you very much for staying up. I know it's getting late there at your end. I guess it's getting on for sort of 8:30, 8:45. So thank you for staying with us for this session. And I thought it would be nice just to explore a couple of the things that have come up in the discussions so far and around the whole topic of formative and summative assessment, and that whole piece around the future is here already, and how we move forward. And I wanted to pick up a little bit on artificial intelligence first. We've got increasing focus around AI in e-assessment. I wondered whether you thought that was a good thing, firstly, and if so, what you see as the main benefits of using AI, and I guess conversely the challenges of using AI within assessment contexts. Who'd like to go first? Mary, do you want to just pick up on that, leading on from your earlier presentation?
Certainly, yeah. I think I suppose one of the things that that seems good for now, for want of a better word, about using AI is that there are obviously, certain things you can start to train computers to do, and that's something we're looking at how that is happening with these tests of English. So in terms of particularly things such as computer adaptive testing, and also training computers to listen and respond, which is what's happening in a lot of language testing settings. So being able to really fine tune the technologies now to help, help in those scenarios where in the past it would have involved a lot of human beings and a lot of people time. You can actually take people out of some of those equations. And also, I think one of the things that I've certainly learned from conducting literature reviews in the last few months, looking at AI in assessment, is learning from the medical sector. What we're learning more and more, particularly in the use of analysis for actually predicting illnesses, looking at diagnosis. AI technology is actually starting to beat human beings in some cases, being more accurate in its diagnosis. And so I think there's aspects of that I think are really helpful and potentially could be really useful to us going forward.
I think it often comes back to what we use, what we've talked earlier on, or you've talked earlier on about people's understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And it is about that, isn't it? It's about how you're trying to use the technology and making sure that you're using it to do things that are helpful to people, like doing the heavy lifting and of data sorting and that kind of thing. Has anyone else got any thoughts or comments on this particular piece? Pat, you
know I've always got an opinion on everything, Matt. So, I mean, I noticed in the previous awards there was with labs, and I know they're using AI, other organisations are as well. So it's here now, and it is going to be used. I think it's not necessarily a panacea that's going to solve everyone's problems. So I think if it's used in the right way, as you just said, Matt, to solve the problems that are relating to, you know, large volumes of data. NLP improving, you know, making it easier for people to be able to do things that perhaps was more difficult before, whether that's essay scoring or it's just writing items even. I know there's other organizations that are helping item writers to write good items using AI, etc. So there's lots and lots of different ways. It's just a question of making sure it's used properly. But I think part of the challenge is, though, is that it's become a bit of a buzzword now, AI. And a lot of organizations say, hey, we're doing AI. And it's like, well, are you really? And unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to differentiate between AI in terms of, is it really AI and what's good AI and what's bad AI? So it's a very, very important area. And I think there's probably going to be a lot more of it to come.
Yeah, and I suppose that's important, isn't it? Because if people have a bad experience of AI because their experience of something isn't actually really AI at all, but they don't realize or differentiate that, then that has a negative backwash on everything else that we're trying to do and to move forward. Any other thoughts on this particular topic? Jeremy, you look poised.
Yeah, I'm poised.
I
mean, in terms of good or bad, I think it's with anything related to the context of how it's used. And like you said, Matt, you know, if it's used in a way that is relevant to the assessment, then, you know, let's explore it rather than with anything technology based, using technology for technology's sake. Just on Mary's point, in sort of medical, in the medical field, we've actually been doing a bit of work in medical assessment using AI. And this is, again, obviously everything you do with assessment, you're looking at validity, reliability, but also authenticity, and using AI language, you know, to make an assessment more authentic, i.e. conversing with a virtual patient, for example, and using AI to ensure that is an authentic conversation that's had, rather than you know, a staged actor who will only give you a range of kind of like responses as they've been done via a script. It has huge potential in medical assessment for looking at how medical students they're improving and you know, their clinical reasoning skills, for example, and how they interact with patients to do that. And all of that, if it's done within an assessment context, the data that is captured as a result of that provides huge potential to analyze and look to a really granular level about how students are learning and applying that learning when they're actually doing the really important bit, which is talking to a patient. And yeah, so that I think, you know, like Pat says, you know, AI is here. It's not going away. People, you know, think that AI is like Netflix, where it will just serve you up the next program based on something that you've watched before. And, you know, I think actually a lot of, I suspect a lot of what we'll talk about this afternoon, we'll trace it back to something that Mary said in her keynote, which is about literacy. So, you know, again, if you're looking at the use of any form of new technology or new buzzword or what have you, it's going to be directly correlated back to literacy about what that is, why it's there, and what job it's doing.
No, that's a very good point. And of course, one of the areas where there's always skepticism, I think anyway, Mark's skepticism around the use of innovation in the way we apply technology and assessment is national tests. And Helen, I know ACER have got lots of experience of delivering national tests at scale, both in Australia and here in the UK. Have you got a view on this and how national tests might adopt and embrace this whole, whether it's AI or just technology in general, a bit more openly?
Okay, if I take the Scottish National Assessments that Desmond referred to earlier as an example, we've got an adaptive assessment model there. So we're still talking questions that are the sorts of things that you might have seen in a paper-based test, but now you're not getting a model where everyone's getting the same 30, say, questions, and you're getting information on questions that are way too easy for some learners or way too difficult for others. It's possible to personalise the questions that each learner sees to better suit what they're getting right or wrong initially. So you get far more information positioned about exactly where the learner is in their understanding. And going back a couple of years when the assessments were first been introduced in Scotland, I was at a session talking to P1 teachers, so teachers of 4 and 5-year-old children, around how the assessment model worked. And I could see a sort of light bulb moment for one of the teachers when I was talking about the fact that for the most able children, this might be a bit of an unfamiliar experience because they wouldn't necessarily get all the questions right. And if the model's set up correctly, we wouldn't expect them to. And that's really useful information for the teacher because they're finding out exactly how far that child can go in their learning. And therefore, for every child, wherever they are in their education and learning journey, the teacher has information that they can use to target their future teaching. And that is something that I don't think is commonly understood at the moment, that it feels like children are suddenly doing badly if they don't get everything right the whole time. So I guess quite a simple example compared to what we have been talking about, or some of the other panelists have been talking about in terms of AI. But I think the same principles apply in terms of really needing to communicate what it is that we're setting out to achieve in terms of how we're scoring whatever assessment it might be, and what success might look like, or what the information might look like that's coming out at the other end, and how we use it.
And I guess there's a big cultural aspect to that expectation management piece, isn't there? Where national tests in particular have always been seen as summative, and the reality is that they're starting to change and not just be summative, be formative too. And so your points there, Helen, play to that, I think. And I'm conscious also that AI and technology has one of the big benefit potentials is in supporting really large scale assessments. And Viral, I know TCS are involved in quite a lot of very large scale assessments. What's your view on the use of AI and the stakeholders that you're engaging with? What are their views on benefits and challenges of embracing more of this?
Yeah. So Matt, we believe that AI/ML needs to be considered as a friend of human rather than replacing the human. Many people are working on AI/ML to just replace human. I don't think so that's going to be feasible even in the next 10 years to come. The teachers have to be there in the system, and AI and ML has to be seen as a support system to the teachers and learners rather than replacing them. So this is one very important learning. If we work on AI/ML on this aspect and considering them as a friend of teacher, I think AI/ML can go a long way. There are a lot of aspects in AI/ML. If you look at it today, whether it is authentication, whether it is face authentication, signature, or handwriting mismatch through AI, or deduplication, building the question bank, remote proctoring, translation, test scoring, auto marking, the significant number of areas. If you look at all these areas, will we ever think that we will replace human? The answer is no. This has to be the aid to the teacher and learner, and that confidence building is very much required. This is my viewpoint on AI/ML. And this education to the educators is very important in my opinion.
I know, I think you're absolutely right. And Mary, you touched on that as well, I think, a little bit in your presentation. And then in the little show reel that was played while we were in the networking break, if any of you watched that, you'll remember that I talked to this point too, that I always think that AI isn't misdescribed, because AI does mean artificial intelligence, but I always think it is better described as augmented intelligence, because it's there to support that process, not replace it necessarily. So no, that's great. Thank you all for your thoughts on that. I want to turn now, because I think it would be remiss not to the impact of the pandemic on the assessment process, because we all, wherever we are in the world, have been through quite a tumultuous time in education and within assessment, particularly around the way that the pandemic has impacted on assessment delivery. And certainly in the UK, we've seen quite a shift in certain sectors, I think particularly work-based learning and universities, to the use of open book exams. So for those watching this who aren't familiar with the open book concept, it's where we're trying to not worry so much about knowledge recall, giving the students access to the information that they need. But the test and the thing we're really trying to understand is how good they are at applying that knowledge into the context of their work or whatever it is that they're being tested around. I wondered whether you all felt that was a good thing, the shift and the rise, if you like, in more use of open book assessments. and whether you thought that it might spread beyond those initial areas where it's gained some resonance in work-based learning and universities. Particularly, I'm curious about schools and colleges. You know, can we see a point where summative assessments become more open book in their approach in schools and colleges? Is that a desirable thing? What are your thoughts? Who would like to go first on this? Helen, do you want to kick us off? Is that putting you on the spot?
I guess it depends on what sort of subjects we're talking about. I think if you're talking about something that's, I guess, sort of maybe more knowledge and skills based, I have a maths background, so that's where I naturally go to, I guess, when I'm giving responses to questions. I'm wondering maybe less so if you've got sort of worked methods that you might be seeing in questions, but it very much depends on the style of the assessment that we're talking about. If it's something where the methods that are needed aren't signposted, so it's a much more strongly reasoning focused where you need to tease out what's needed, maybe there is a place. I think there may be for some other subjects more role, but I'm not convinced fully at the school-based level yet, I must be honest.
Okay, no, thank you for that. But Pat, you do quite a lot internationally. I was wondering whether that phenomenon had been seen beyond UK shores, that shift.
I mean, that was one of the submissions for the Summative Assessment Award, was the work that was being done by University of Pretoria, where they were saying, look, people are going to communicate, they're going to use WhatsApp or WeChat or whatever it might be. So they actually created their own chat tool and embedded it in the assessment process, because they said, look, we can't do high stakes testing, so we're going to make it into an open book type format. Now, I think the jury's still out about whether that's effective and if that's the right way of doing things, but I think it's unavoidable, but also that the way we're doing assessments hasn't fundamentally changed. I know there's an argument about whether standardized assessments are the best way of assessing knowledge, etc., but I think that they are here for a little while yet. But I think other countries are looking at it, but there's still very much that traditional, people like to have summative tests at the end of the academic year, and they take them in the same way, because that's what people are used to, and the people making decisions are used to doing that. So, I mean, we've got our own regulators in the UK, so I think perhaps it might be in a less regulated sector where it might be more easily adopted, where the organization that's making the decision can say, do you know what, we're happy with that. Do you know, we don't have to have an end test. If we can demonstrate that a learner has made progress, has learned the information, do we really care whether they can recall it or they've looked it up? It's the outcome that's important rather than being a memory test. So I think it will be done more and more, but I think it's going to take a while to make it in the UK and the US and those more established markets, unless it's something very, very specialist.
Okay, thank you for that, Pat. Anyone else wanted to come in on this? Viral, did you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I have a viewpoint on this. See, based on my interaction with students and teachers, there are 2 points that I figured out on the open book exam. One is, see, this open book exam is always perceived as very difficult, because students feel that if it is an open book exam, I don't know whether the syllabus and the curriculum, whatever is asked in that, whether it will be really, I'll be able to clear that. So there is an anxiety factor when you go for open book exam. From the examination body perspective, you believe that you are making it more open and transparent process. But if you look at from the student perspective, they feel a bit more anxiety that it must be a difficult paper, right? And I'll not be able to clear, I'll not be able to score more, etc. Second is from the teacher's perspective, if you look at it, when you go for open book exam, each and every teacher always would like to see the great results of their student, right? So there is a bit of nervousness at that level also, saying that if it is an open book exam and if my students do not do well, my institute will have a negative impression on me, right? So there are 2 different aspects from the teacher and student perspective. But I would say that if really open book exam needs to be a culture, it has to start from very beginning. It cannot be just a one-off exam becoming an open book exam. It has to be the whole education system or process has to follow that way, in my view. And more than the open book exam, I believe summative structure of the exam needs to go more towards hands-on assessment or skilling test, etc., rather than just a theory test. This is my viewpoint.
Great, thank you for that. I think you're right about the cultural shift, and also needing to start early. And Mary, I suppose that resonates back to teacher training again, doesn't it? It's about trying to help set expectations, because this is, open book could be argued, it is a completely different way of assessing things, and we have to get people ready for that, right?
Yes, we do. And in teacher education,
sorry,
it'll be the one thing everyone will take away.
Yes.
No, you're absolutely right. It's about, I have this kind of theory of maybe little and often presenting these ideas, but it's also stopping this narrative in assessment of it's one thing or it's the other thing. It's about saying it can be a lot of different things, and we don't have to throw out all exams if we're going to bring in open book exams. We continue to develop and refine and adapt our system. I think what I struggle with most at the moment is we seem to be stuck in somewhere around about 1860 in terms of how we actually assess how students learn in this country in particular. And then that is a real problem when they come to university, because they're shocked then when people like me say, well, I'm not worried about how you present this thing. What I want to see is the argument you construct, and you've got up to 2,000 words to do that. And I see, even at master's level, students absolutely wrestling and horrified at having to make decisions about what their assessment looks like, which is a shame. Yeah.
Well, and that plays back to your point earlier about the difference between what students need and what students want, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
They want to be handheld, but actually they need to be more independent if they're going to succeed once they get beyond formal education. So that's really interesting. Jeremy, I'm struck by the fact that we've talked, there about how assessment is used as a tool, and open book is an example of that. You must have seen lots of examples where there's been innovative use of assessment approaches, technology-wise or otherwise, I suppose. Has anything really struck you in that, and any particular sector that you think is being particularly innovative in its use of supporting summative or formative assessment through slightly different approaches?
As a result of the pandemic?
Yeah.
In terms of like the open book example that you've given, Matt, we definitely saw that last year. We did a piece of research with UK universities towards the end of summer last year, when they were, obviously they just completed their round of kind of assessments of students, and all of the decisions that those universities had taken were very interesting to see. Not only in terms of the type of assessment that they'd used, and to Mary's point, they'd used a variety of methods of assessment within that, but some of which were open book, but all were using technology. And there was a very strong feeling as a result of that they wouldn't go backwards. And that's not my terminology. That was terminology that was coming from universities. So they wouldn't be taking a backward step to where they had been previously, although they'd been forced due to circumstance down this road. It had accelerated plans that they had been making, or were slightly worried about making, but in the end had to kind of make the plunge. So yes, I think we've seen quite a lot of different approaches, and but I think to Patrick's point, where we'll see that kind of like embed and pick up and continue is in those less regulated environments. Sad to say, I think it's. I think it was Mary Mary, one of the delegates, had posed a question about this. Is this an opportunity for schools? Well, yes, we could very much see it as an opportunity for schools, but the barriers to adoption in that general qualifications kind of arena are pretty large. And I think that and Mary saying stuck in 1860, it's going to be difficult to move beyond that, even despite obviously everything that we've experienced in the last 12 months.
There's an interesting comment actually in the chat. It's not really a formal question, but talking about how open book might be a really good way of approaching IT-based subjects, so like Java coding and that kind of stuff, where you want to see practical application of the knowledge that they have. But then they also point to, you know, why not then, if that works there, why not extend that into universities, or even the comment goes on T-levels, you know, so T-levels, brand new suite of, well, relatively brand new suite of assessments from on a national level here in the UK, assessment done the way it's always been done. You know, why not? And I'm not suggesting we delve into that now, because we could be here for a few hours.
I've definitely, you know, to your point, seen examples of that, you know, in terms of coding, and also within accountancy as well, with you know, actual use of applications, but, you know, kind of enveloped within an assessment framework, technology framework that allows the candidates to express and do what they would normally be doing, and have that captured as part of their assessment.
So I'm a little conscious of time, because it's been great chatting, and we've got just under 10 minutes left. So I'm just thinking about there's a view here. We obviously the theme of the event is around formative and summative, and there is I think an increasing view, and it'd be interesting to hear your comments on this, that there's a blurring starting to happen between formative and summative, and what I mean by that is that formative assessments are being used as an integral part in some areas to feed into the summative award. So it's not just about turning up and doing really well in that hot exam hall that Mary was talking about earlier on. It's also about the journey to that point, and that there's some more and more relevance being paid to formative assessment. I'm particularly interested in, if we acknowledge that that's a thing, feedback has always been a very important part of formative assessment. So the giving the student back some pointers on how they can improve their work based on that formative assessment, or that intervention, learning intervention is another way of putting it, that's taken place. What do you think about the role of feedback in summative assessment? I know, you know, again, Mary, we could talk about students' perception and the valuing of the grade rather than the feedback that they get, and perhaps we might start there. If we started to put more emphasis on constructive feedback to help the student as part of the summative assessment experience, how do you think students would react to that?
I think it would. I think some students would love it. I think the reality is, when you look right across all phases of education with regard to feedback, once you've done a summative assessment and the student has the grade, the chances of them looking at the feedback are really slim. So, you know, those of us in academia do sneaky things like not allowing students to see the grade till they've read the feedback and things like that. We've tried all sorts of things, because it's really interesting that culture is invoked from school from very early age, and you see it in lots of different countries as well. It's not just an English phenomenon. So I think it is an issue, and it's just part of this literacy thing. I'm sorry to sort of bang on about the same thing, but I think this is what it comes back to: is helping people understand, is it that you just want or need a grade at this point, or do you need something else to move you on further? And that's the reality of it. And for some tests, perhaps some very specific summative tests, you might not need a great deal of feedback. You need to just know at that point, I've done that, so that will signal I'm moving on to the next thing. Whereas I think there are other things where you might need to know more about actually even how you took the test or what you were doing in it. That helped.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. And Helen, in the context of national tests again, you know, where we've seen some shifting between purely summative to more formative pieces, what's the role of feedback in the national test context, do you think?
I think I might start by going back 20 years. When I was working in England on the SATS test back then, we did do a project for a while, which was called Implications for Teaching and Learning, where we brought in lots of markers and coded responses from the SATS tests and produced materials that identified common errors, different methods, and how successful they were for learners of different abilities. So this isn't a new concept, but I think when we were back predominantly paper-based, it was a lot harder to do. So it was probably only dabbled in for programs that had the money that could do that, whereas now we're in a world where the technology can do that for us a lot more readily. In Scotland, we're obviously providing feedback primarily for teachers rather than learners in this instance, although I would see no problem in providing feedback to learners. That was just the way this particular program has been set up. But again, I think we've got more educating to do in terms of what you do with this information. I think a lot of schools have seen reporting and feedback as the realm of the school leadership team to go away and do something with, when really, if we're talking about which questions across different curriculum areas children are getting right and wrong, and are there patterns across the class, that's something that can be really powerful for the teacher in terms of identifying areas where they can be focusing their future learning. So some people are doing it and they're doing it well, but it's still feeling like a new area, particularly I think probably when it's coming through from national assessments that aren't quite been imposed by the government. And there's not the accountability measure there in Scotland, or indeed in Wales, that there is in England. But I guess you're not necessarily choosing to do it in the same way as you might be if you're going out and purchasing a scheme because you've got a genuine reason for wanting something specific.
Yes, no, I get that. Thank you for that. That's a really good point, and some comments coming through on the chat that wholeheartedly agree with you there, Helen. I'm conscious
to that, actually, Matt.
Of course you can, Pat.
Wasn't there a move for the GCSEs and A-level for the students to get back their exam papers at the end of it? Now, obviously, COVID, we're lucky to have exams at the moment, but I'm sure, I know there's organisations that do e-marking like our own. I'm sure that was one of the things that was going to have to happen, where students would be entitled to see their exam paper. Now, whether that will happen or not, I don't know, but that to me sounds ideal. I guess the concern is everyone's then going to query about whether it was marked properly and everything else, but why wouldn't you?
Yeah, but I suspect that's less to do with feedback, or get a student wanting to get feedback than obviously, wanting to see if they could look at their grades. I mean, feedback's hugely important, and I think that as we go through life and move into the workplace, we come to value feedback more, which is a shame. And I think when we need to start to embed it at a much younger age, so that kids, as they progress through the education system, it's not just about, as Mary said, they're looking for their grade and then they I've got my grade and I move on. It's about, much earlier than that, embedding in them, the power of feedback to help them, and then so that when you do get into your exam sessions and then further into workplace, you're much better prepared for that, because feedback comes in all sorts of different forms, and I think that's the challenge for us, more societally and culturally, to kind of try and embed that in a much younger age.
No, a good point. Viral, anything to add on the feedback point?
Yeah, so in India, if you look at it, there is a process of sharing the feedback by some of the institution and universities after the summative exam. But most of those processes are towards the re-evaluation or rechecking, etc. So I don't know whether there's much value to the student, because he has already moved to the next step, right, when the summative exam is over, right? So there is a mindset that, okay, I just have to move to the next step and more worried about the next step rather than worried about my previous thing. So there processes of feedback exist, but they are more towards checking, recorrection, re-evaluation, etc.
Great, thank you for that. Well, I'm conscious that we are really basically out of time, and as I think I mentioned to some of you separately before the event, I was going to ask you to start looking at making predictions of what you thought might happen with assessment in the next 5 years, as Ken Boston famously did from the QCA back in 2004. I'm going to let you off that, so you don't have to worry about doing that. But what I would like you to do instead is just, in 30 seconds, what are your predictions for how the impact of COVID will stay with us? You know, will they stay with us? Will they stay with us for very long? Do you think people, there was a comment from Marianne from the Chartered Institute of Educational Assessors in the chat, will we go back to the way we were with assessment? Viral, what's your thought on this? Is it here to stay?
I believe we'll be back to normal very soon, and the assessments will go back to the way it was happening very soon, maybe 6 months, 9 months down the line.
Okay, thank you for that. Pat?
I'm much more cynical. I think that this is going to be here to stay. I don't think there's going to suddenly be a stop in the potential risk of COVID, but I think what it has highlighted is that, I mean, countries I mentioned about international, Kenya lost an entire academic year. There's no school for a year. It's a whole generation that are going to have an impact because they've had to stay behind. And then the next generation, because they've got twice as many kids. So I think what it means is we have to have an online learning option for every school everywhere in the world. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, whatever, but I think there has to be the use of technology in both learning and assessment to enable schools to be able to carry on if this happens again.
To have a contingency plan, basically.
But hopefully it's not contingent. Hopefully it becomes a norm of students being able to learn at school and at home at the same time.
Yeah, good point. Jeremy?
I think it depends on which sector you're perhaps looking at. So I think some of the changes that we've seen will certainly be here to stay, but more so in certain sectors than others. Again, to be without wishing to be pessimistic about the general qualifications environment, I can see that being the one that reverts. Is the one that kind of says, okay, look, although we know we can't have this situation again, we probably don't think it's going to happen again, and they'll be the ones that will kind of take the step backwards to more traditional methods. Whereas I think most other sectors, certainly I know within the university sector and professional education and what have you, that's less likely to happen. And general qualifications will eventually take more steps because they have been taking steps, but I don't think this isn't the thing that's going to push them right over the edge into embracing sort of more technology.
No, I think that's a good point. Mary, what are your thoughts on this?
I think in higher education, the shift has actually happened because we were pushed. I think a lot of people have actually realised, gosh, this change in what we do and how we work and how we educate has actually had a lot of positive elements, as well as it being absolutely exhausted and we're all shattered at the moment, just like all teachers are in schools. I think I'm more pessimistic about what's going to happen nationally in schools. I think that there is a lack of political will there. And I think also the inequity that I mentioned in my talk is a huge issue. And the problem is that for the government, certainly at the moment, is that COVID blew that out into the open. It made it public. And I think that has to be dealt with, and it has to be looked at, that idea that all this so-called equality didn't actually exist. And this is a real issue going forward, and something that needs to be taken seriously, in terms of what the pandemic's done. I think, as Patrick said, and as Viral said, just the amount of learning loss that's gone on, and Ofqual's doing research into this at the moment, is vast. And I've been talking, long into the evenings with a 17-year-old recently about what's happening this year, then what's going to happen for her exams or not next year. So I think the issue with assessments and COVID for national testing is going to run on for, I wouldn't be surprised if 2 or 3 years' time we finally get back to some sort of norm, but I'm not sure what that will look like.
No, I think that's a good point. I think your point about inequality, by the way, Marianne from CIEA has picked that up in the chat as well. I think it's a very good point. We've got to make sure that whatever we do, we try and tackle that particular piece in whatever way is best. Helen, just to close us off, what are your thoughts on the predictions of what's going to happen?
I mean, I guess to sort of stick with the national assessment arena, having assessments online and been formative in Scotland and Wales, I think has become a tool to support teachers as they try to make sense of where the learning loss has been and where they need to make up. So I guess, like fellow panelists, I'm a little bit sceptical about what might happen in the long-term future, but an aspiration that in England we've not had SATs for 2 years. Could this be a motivation to think about how assessment might change and to look across the borders to see what's happening in other countries? We'll see.
I think that just to pick up on that final point, looking beyond our own shores, I think is something that all countries around the world can do better. And I know the UK is particularly guilty of that. We're starting to, and there's definitely some really good work going on around that. But that is one of the biggest challenges. Listen, thank you very much for joining us for this panel discussion. That's been tremendously interesting. I've really enjoyed it. I hope everyone who's watching has enjoyed that. And thank you very much for your contributions. Unfortunately, we have to bring it to a close there. But thank you again, and very much enjoyed chatting to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, as I say, I hope you enjoyed that panel discussion and that it provided you with some insight into people's thoughts around those topical areas. And thank you very much for the contributions through the chat to that discussion. We're going to go briefly now to talk to the winners of the 2 awards. And I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Ryan from Monash University. Chris, thank you very much for staying up so late to join us today, because I guess it's past midnight where you are right now. And Andrew Flood, from COO from Prodigy Learning, the winners of the Best Formative Category Award. Thank you very much, and many congratulations to you both on your wins. We haven't got a huge amount of time, but one of the things that I think is really important about the awards is helping to use the awards program to propagate better understanding of what's possible in the world of e-assessment, so that we get, a greater uptake of innovative technology uses. Chris, I'm going to be a bit mean and say you've got a minute, but can you just sort of summarize the key points about your project?
Oh, look, I think one of the key things that we've done is we've gone from discipline to discipline, getting academics to see how they can get on board with what we've got, and really inviting them to reimagine how they do their assessment, whilst also having, in the end, we had about 600 students co-develop the platform from their perspective. Perhaps more interestingly, though, in terms of the conversation that was just had with the panel, is where we're going and what we've already got there as well. We've got 12 and 24-hour exam windows for some of our assessments, take-home exams, not only just open book, but design-based work in engineering, which is one of the more highly accredited courses that we have. And that's how they wanted to use our e-assessment platform. When we're looking at IT, they very much are leading to get us to have a specialist software environment embedded in the platform, so that they know exactly that the students can use that environment in a way which is not just manipulating data or answering questions, but being able to show that they can work within that environment. And there's a whole raft of different approaches that they've got there. It's interesting that we've then had to talk to all of our academics to start thinking about divergent type questions, divergent thinking, as opposed to convergent thinking questions. That's been a really big push for us. And I think as a whole, in terms of transitioning academics across all of our disciplines, we've been saying, look, let's just get everyone onto the platform, get everyone to be able to replicate what they can do. And then as a university, start a conversation of what do you want to actually do in the assessment of our students? And that is fortunately where we are right now.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think that critical mass thing is critically important, isn't it? To get people to engage with it, to get people to understand that it's just a tool that you can use, and you have to think about how you want to use it. But it's it's no different from a pen. You just got to think about how you want to use it and what sort of assessment is most applicable to that particular piece. So thank you for that summary. Andrew, moving to your project, which was focused on the formative side, I know some of the themes that came up in the last discussion, the panel discussion around equity, was important in your project. Can you tell us just a little bit about the project that you guys were involved in? And
absolutely. And look, it's fantastic to be here today, and obviously thanks to the EAA and to the sponsors and everyone else. This really came as a passion project for us as a business, bringing together. We're all of us on this event passionate about e-assessment. We've got a particular interest in digital skills, and this product was all about opening up a pathway to engage young learners in computer science, in coding. So it's a curriculum, assessments, and ultimately credentials delivered through the medium of Minecraft. So delivered through the most popular game in the world and assessed on our Skillify assessment platform. Really about using game-based learning to break down two barriers: engaging younger and critically more diverse learners. So engaging a wide landscape of learners at an earlier age in computer science. We know those minds are made up early. So game-based learning to hook them in. And then also make it easy to teach. So to have a package solution that allows the teachers to work through learning activities delivered through a gamed environment, and assess the kids through that environment with the aim of them achieving standards-based credentials through the program. And to one of the points raised on the last panel discussion, the question about the link between formative onto summative assessment. The program actually concludes with a capstone credential, which is a summative exam, a more classic online exam that's delivered, and indeed is the formal outcome recognized on a lot of the US state lists, where we've had this program adopted in a lot of states over in the US, and indeed it started in the UK and worked its way out to other parts of the world. So fantastic to have this recognition tonight, and I think it ties very well with some of the themes that have been mentioned.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Andrew. Thank you again both for joining us. It's really great to have this chance just to chat briefly about your projects. And what we're hoping we might be able to do is run a webinar later in the year where we can exemplify a bit more about the projects and give you an opportunity to share a bit more about what you guys have been doing. Because as I said a couple of minutes ago, that's the most important thing about these awards. Yeah, absolutely, it's about applauding and awarding your efforts, but it's fundamentally about enriching the sector as a whole with examples of best practice. So thank you for submitting. Many congratulations on winning, and thank you again for joining us at the awards ceremony.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So just to bring things to a close, thank you again for sticking with us. I hope you've enjoyed the event today. I've got a couple of thank yous to give out. Before I do, I want to extend that note of congratulations to all of our finalists. I think it's often underestimated how much becoming a finalist means in the awards program. I mean, if you take some of the categories where we had multiples of tens of entries into each category, to be shortlisted is a big thing, and so many congratulations to everyone who succeeded in being finalist, finalized in their category. Apologies, and especially to our two winners today. I want to say thank you to our sponsors again. As I said earlier on, we can't do any of this without our sponsors' support. So PSI, who are our headline sponsor for the conference and awards this year, ACER for their support with the Formative Project Award, and TCS Ion for their support with the Summative Award category. I also want to extend a thank you to Surpass from BTL, who have provided us with all the technical support. And on a more personal note, the people behind the scenes that you don't see in these events. So my thanks to Tim Burnett, the chair of the EAA, to Gareth Hopkins, one of the EAA board members, to Graham Hudson, another member of the EAA board, who coordinates the interactions with all the keynote speakers for the events, to Tracy Shrimpton from Sixth Sense Marketing, who's been helping us promote the awards, and last but not least, to Karen Pernies, who, as many of you will know, does a huge amount of work in supporting the events and the marketing of the awards. And usually I embarrass when we have a physical ceremony by awarding her with a bouquet of flowers. Karen, a virtual bouquet of flowers to you for your help and effort with this first of our series of 4 events. Obviously, a big thank you to everyone for joining us. And I hope you have found the whole ceremony and the conference side of the event useful. If you have, please join us again next Tuesday on the 15th of June between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. again. So exactly the same time, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. British Summer Time, when we're going to be celebrating the champions of change and looking specifically at the innovation and transformational project categories. And talking about that whole area of change in a great more detail. We have, as we have throughout the event, got the AirMeet networking platform running in the background. We'll keep that up and running for another 10 or 15 minutes so that you can go and network there with people who have been at the events, talk to the finalists, talk to the winners. If Chris can stay up for a little longer, then you have the opportunity to find out a little bit more about the projects there. So if you weren't already logged into the AirMeet platform, it's quick and easy to move across to from the live stream. If you just come out of the live stream, go back to the conference website, click on the live link, and you'll get the option to click on Engage and Network. If you follow that option, it'll take you to the AirMeet platform. So, as I say, thank you very much for joining us. I really hope you have enjoyed the event. Thank you to all of our sponsors, to everybody who entered the summative and formative categories this year, and to our finalists and winners. And there's that link on the screen. If you want to join us on the networking platform now, go to that link if you're not already signed into AirMeet, and that will give you the option to click on Engage and Network, and that will take you to the AirMeet platform. So without further ado, I'll leave it there. And look forward to chatting to some of you on the AirMeet networking platform very shortly. Thanks very much.